Hello, I'm Jack Shagner.
And I'm Henry Peden. The boundary between Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware is known as the Mason-Dixon line. It was established over a 4-year period from 1763 to 1767 by Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, who were at that time rising astronomers of celebrity in London.
From its West Virginia end, the line traverses east 230 miles to a point southwest of Philadelphia, where the tangent line heads south about 82 miles, dividing the Eastern Shore Peninsula into Maryland and Delaware. Finally, just above Salisbury, Maryland, they later surveyed east, heading 20 miles trans-peninsula line across the peninsula to the Atlantic Ocean.
In this program, we are primarily focused on the 18-mile horizontal portion that defined the northern border of Harford County with Pennsylvania and the associated mile markers placed along the way. We are very fortunate to have Havre de Grace-born James Allen Poole, a self-styled curious farm boy who has traversed the county's northern border, locating and photographing these historic Mason-Dixon markers.
Before we introduce James Poole, however, it is instructive to review the decision to hire Mason and Dixon and employ their scientific instruments and knowledge to create an accurate line, thus establishing sound procedures and practices for surveyors who followed. Our narrator tells the story.
In 1632, Great Britain's King James I granted land to Cecil Calvert north of the Potomac River up to the 40th parallel, and this tract would be known as Maryland in honor of the king's wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. About a half-century later, in 1681, Charles II granted a charter to William Penn for territory to be called Pennsylvania, citing land above Maryland's border, but described it somewhat differently, leading to uncertainty as to the exact location of the boundary. Colonial surveyors were hired to resolve the issue, but were unable to make real progress. Squabbling between the colonies continued when finally Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon were hired, and in 1763 began the survey of a line along the 39.7th parallel. Charles Mason of Gloucestershire, England, was born in early 1728, the son of a miller and baker, and was baptized on May 1, 1728, at the parish church in Sapperton. From his youth, he was drawn to mathematics and the observation of the stars. He found encouragement in the local schoolmaster, Robert Stratford, who was also a knowledgeable mathematician. Before he was 30, Mason was assistant astronomer to the third Astronomer Royal, the Reverend James Bradley, at the Royal Greenwich Observatory. His work on lunar tables was essential in establishing longitude at sea, which was one of the navigational preoccupations of that age. The work was prestigious but not well paid. Mason married Rebecca, who died in 1759, and then about 1770 wed Mary, who bore him 7 sons and 1 daughter. He was described as a cool, deliberate, painstaking man who was never in a hurry. From a study of his signature, it was thought he was the more scientific individual of the Mason-Dixon team. Charles Mason died on October 25, 1786, and was buried in the graveyard of Christ Church in Philadelphia. Jeremiah Dixon came from Cockfield, County Durham, and is sometimes described as a miner's son, as his Quaker father owned a coal mine. He was born in 1733 and received his formal education at John Kipling's Academy. Dixon's mathematical intellect became known to the celebrated and strange compound of genius and eccentricity of William Emerson, who befriended and tutored him. He also had an engineering mentor, John Bird, who was a maker of outstanding scientific apparatuses, including sextants and telescopes. Bird's instruments would prove essential to the success of Mason and Dixon's surveys, and undoubtedly fed Dixon's own interest in celestial observations. Dixon also appears to have been, in local Durham parlance, a bit of a lad who was sometimes in trouble with his Quaker relatives and friends. He was fond of a drink and accused of drunkenness on more than one occasion. Allegedly, he was also fond of walking around the countryside dressed in a red coat and wearing a cocked hat. Although he never married, he certainly had children and was able to provide for them later in life. Compared to Mason, Dixon was a younger and more active man, a man of an impatient spirit and nervous temperament. It was thought that such an individual worked best with a more sober-sided colleague such as Mason. Dixon died at Cockfield in 1779 at the age of 45. It is not known how Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon were selected to establish the line, but in 1763 they took passage with Captain Falconer, arriving in Philadelphia on November 15th to initiate the process. To survey a boundary across a forested wilderness required a tented army of many people. For assistance, they had surveyor Alexander McLean, who was employed as their tent keeper, which was an important job for a constantly moving large work party. Moses Barnes initially served as overseer and later as one of the 5 instrument bearers, relieving Matthew Marine, who became the observer. William Darby and Jonathan Cope stretched the chain daily through a path 8 to 9 yards wide, called a vista, that had been cleared by axemen whose numbers varied from 6 to 30. As well, there were commissaries who acquired food, 2 cooks who provided meals, baggage carriers, milkmaids, and numerous servants and laborers, who made up the surveying party that generally numbered about 43. They would first set stout wooden posts, later replaced by stone markers quarried and engraved on the Isle of Portland in England. Today these markers are weathered, but when new, the stones measured 12 by 12 inches and varied in length from 3.5 to 5 feet, weighing upwards of 500 pounds. First and foremost, astronomers Mason and Dixon were stargazers, who brought with them a large amount of scientific equipment, so much so it required 5 individuals with pack animals or wagons to care for and transport the boxes when moving from one location to another. Beginning at a point 15 miles south of Philadelphia, they proceeded with their survey using John Bird's astronomical transit for latitude measurements. The rotation of the Earth around its north-south axis creates our 24-hour day, and its elliptical rotation around the Sun produces our yearly seasons. With respect to a distant star, however, this continuous change of spatial position is insignificant and can be ignored. Thus, observations of a star are only affected by the Earth's east-west rotation. Therefore, if a star peaks at, say, 44 degrees today, it will do so every single day in the future. To find stars in the universe that had a declination of 39.7 degrees, Mason and Dixon identified 5 stars: Vega, Delta Cygnus, Satyr, Deneb, and Capella, that, depending on the season, would be used to determine the 39.7-degree latitude of their east-west survey line. The distance between mile markers was measured with a 66-foot so-called surveyor's chain that had been developed by Edmund Gunter. One end of the chain was set on a marker, with the other end identified with a stake in the ground. A mile, being 5,280 feet, necessitated 80 measured segments before another marker could be set. To keep these in a straight line, the survey team used a theodolite. Such a task along a level, cleared path along a vista was relatively straightforward, but in hilly country, other methods had to be employed. In these cases, Mason and Dixon used wooden calibrated measuring rods where the ends had been tipped with brass plates and held horizontal using center-mounted levels. To align the ends of the sticks, a plumb bob was employed. The permanent mile markers were made of oolite limestone that had been shipped to America from England with the letter P on one side and M on the other for Pennsylvania and Maryland. Over time, the survey crew would work their way west to a little over 230 miles. James Poole now provides an overview of his search for Harford County markers, followed by his recollections of visits to the 18 markers along the county's border with Pennsylvania.
My efforts to photograph the Mason-Dixon markers started off simply out of curiosity. I have always been interested in history and enjoyed being outdoors. To this day, I really don't know what triggered my attention to the markers, as I have known about the Mason-Dixon line since my early childhood. My family lived in Harford, Maryland, which was near marker number 32. That is about 3 miles west of Cardiff. So starting out, I decided to find the ones that bordered Harford County. As this effort unfolded, I became fascinated by the amount of hard work the Mason and Dixon team had put into the survey effort of cutting the trees and brush, then pulling the chains and measuring sticks across the rugged terrain. These clearings were called vistas and were about 25 feet wide and ran the entire length of the survey, a distance of about 230 miles. I grew to respect these two men and their crew of laborers. I did not follow a rigid plan for locating the markers, as at times months would go by without looking for them. Due to weather and bugs, I did most of the looking in the winter and early spring. The first photographs of a marker on the Maryland-Pennsylvania line were taken of marker 31 on January the 3rd, 1995 near Grayston, Maryland. I enjoyed the time I spent outside looking for the markers. It was a good way to get a lot of hiking done and wasn't boring. Also, I met a lot of people along the way, with some who knew a good bit about the markers while others didn't know much at all. Only one person wouldn't let me on their property to look for a marker, but I was able to find it from the property next door. Marker 24. This is the first Mason-Dixon marker in Harford County. It is located in a rugged remote area about 2,000 feet from the east end of Cooper Road, around 320 feet above the Susquehanna River. The line at this point was surveyed in June of 1765, and the stone marker was placed here in November of 1766. There have been an excess of such markers shipped to America for use by Mason and Dixon, and many years later, one of them was found and repurposed by the proprietors of the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal. It was erected close to the Mason-Dixon line at a location called Line Bridge to alert passing canal barge operators they were entering the Maryland Tidewater section of the canal, where they had to pay a toll. Marker 25 is the first so-called crown stone along the Harford County border, which was set every 5 miles. It features the Calvert family crest on the Maryland side and the Penn family crest on the Pennsylvania side. This stone is located in a meadow about 200 feet north of the most northern portion of Cooper Road and survives today in a very weathered condition. Marker 26 is west of Flintville Road, where over time it had been partially buried by stream water that flowed into Michael's Run, which deposited sediment. Carefully removing the accumulated soil revealed the M on one side for Maryland and the P on the other side for Pennsylvania. This marker has survived in fairly good condition. Marker 27 is located in the yard of a private residence about 500 feet west of Prospect Road, just after the road veers left crossing into Pennsylvania. It is being well preserved by the property owners. On the Maryland side of the stone, the letter M can clearly be identified, while on the north-facing Pennsylvania side, the letter P is partially obscured by what appears to be a black mold. Marker 28 is located in a wooded area about 1,500 feet west of Ridge Road, along the top of Slate Ridge, sitting at an elevation of about 600 feet. This marker has been spoiled by gunshots, likely from small caliber rifles, as the damage is not too significant. Being on a precipice, no significant amount of foreign matter except for tree leaves has collected around the base. Marker 29 was originally located and a wooded area between the much later villages of Delta, Pennsylvania, and Cardiff, Maryland. After farmers settled in the Cardiff area, Marlin Flahardy opened a feed mill that was served by an adjacent parking lot where the marker was located. To protect the marker from vehicle activity, he buried it below the surface of the lot. Since the mill building spanned the states of both Maryland and Pennsylvania, it was realized the business office was on the Maryland side, hence this determined his feed mill address. All of the buildings have since been demolished subsequent to the time that I located the marker. Marker 30 is the second crown stone in Harford County. As the northern part of Wyford Road leads northwest towards Pennsylvania, it bends to the west just after passing Dooley Road. About 1,800 feet north of this juncture is a wooded area near a stream where Marker 30 is located. Except for a significant chip on the Pennsylvania side, this crown stone is in very good condition, as the Maryland side remains unblemished. At my request, Harford County artist Dave Duran painted this marker, and his framed image proudly hangs in my home. Marker 31 can be found by continuing west on Wyford Road, and upon reaching Line Road, make a sharp right turn, proceeding northeast for about 1/4 mile. Some 800 feet below this point is the marker adjacent to a portion of an old split rail fence that has fallen down. Recently, the marker was accidentally destroyed by a large piece of farm equipment. However, its base remains firmly in place. Marker 32 is about 900 feet north of the intersection of Wyford Road and Grayston Road. This marker was damaged many years ago, and the Maryland side is missing. Of significance to me, it is the marker closest to my home, which is located about 1/2 mile south. Marker 33. This marker is located on the shoulder of Grayston Road about 1,000 feet east of Constitution Road. The marker was broken off by heavy equipment that was attempting to reopen Grayston Road after a heavy snowstorm. It was repaired by the Mason-Dixon Preservation Partnership in 2003, after which grass cutting equipment hit the marker, producing a chip in the stone. Marker 34 is located about 1,000 feet east of McDermott Road. A short distance to the west is the village of Fawn Grove, Pennsylvania. When I originally found it, the top was broken off and missing. A new top was placed on the base by the Mason-Dixon Preservation Partnership in 2003. Marker 35 is the third crown stone in Harford County and is located about 800 feet east of Fawn Grove Road, which becomes Market Street in the village. This marker is in good shape. Marker 36 is located on the north shoulder of Mason-Dixon Road that runs along the border of Maryland and Pennsylvania, below the village of Fawn Grove. It has been broken and repaired several times. Marker 37 is located in a remote area about 1/3 of a mile east of Salt Lake Road, along the edge of a field and an old fence row. Marker 38 is located in a bush at the intersection of Salt Lake Road and Career Road. This marker is very weathered and in poor condition, most likely eroded by road salt and vehicle exhaust, as it is very close to the road. Marker 39 is located in a field about 150 feet west of New Park Road. It remains in pretty good condition. Marker 40 was originally located about 150 feet east of the intersection of Draco Road and the Norrisville Road. In 1902, the property owner at the time refused to cooperate with the resurvey crew that was setting all of the markers in the correct spot and pouring concrete around them. Therefore, they installed a replacement stone 150 feet west of his property on the north side of Draco Road. In the 1950s, a truck hit that stone and broke the top off. The top is now located in the York County Historical Society in York, Pennsylvania. In April of 2014, a group of researchers got together with the property owner and received permission to look for the original marker. After a short search, the base of the original mile marker 40 was found just as Mason and Dixon left it in 1766. This is the only stone in the line that was without protective cement poured around it. The stone is now exposed along with a modern copy that came from Indiana. The dedication ceremony was held on May 21, 2016. This is the last crown stone in Harford County. Marker 41 is the 18th and the last mile marker in Harford County. It is placed in a remote location about 1/3 of a mile east of Long Corner Road.
The official report of the original survey did not mention the name Mason-Dixon line, although sometimes the parallel line was used metaphorically to describe the boundary between slave and free states. The line was resurveyed in 1849, 1900, and again in 1975 with improved technology, resulting in only minor modifications to their original work, which has been described as incredibly accurate. Some of the original Mason-Dixon markers had been placed a few hundred feet from their intended location. However, the errors were so small that their original line remains as the official boundary between Maryland and Pennsylvania. When Mason and Dixon had completed their work and returned to England, they reported to the Astronomer Royal they believed their line did not deviate more than 40 to 50 feet. Later surveys, however, had concluded the line in Gettysburg drifted 900 feet south of the starting latitude and then gradually climbed 160 feet north near Cumberland, Maryland. When it was finished above Morgantown, it was 400 feet south. While in today's world these errors are significant, for the time that Mason and Dixon worked, their survey remains as remarkable. Up to this time, the shape of the Earth had been considered a sphere with a homogeneous core and a smooth surface core, so a plumb bob would always accurately point to the Earth's center. One scientist, Henry Cavendish, however, disagreed and argued that the proximity to large masses like mountains, such as encountered by Mason and Dixon, could pull the plumb bob off a vertical. Subsequent measurements confirmed the Cavendish hypothesis, and this explains some of the errors in the measurement made by Mason and Dixon, who had no knowledge of this factor. The word Dixie may have originally referred to currency, first issued by the Citizens Bank located in the French Quarter of New Orleans, which distributed $10 notes. Other banks in Louisiana followed with the reverse side containing the word dix, or 10 for 10 in French, prompting individuals to call the note a Dixie. A more modern-day parallel can be found in Canada, where in 1987 the government replaced the paper dollar bill with a coin that featured a loon, which instigated the name loonie. Later in 1996, when a $2 coin arrived, it was called a toonie. Another Dixie derivation stems from Johann Dixie, who was a slave owner on Manhattan Island, New York. He sold slaves to southern states, where, once relocated, they spoke of better treatment than working on Dixie's land. No evidence, however, backs up this account or the preceding Louisiana version. A postulated, perhaps credible origin of the word Dixie originates from Bryant's Minstrels in New York City, where on April 4, 1859, they played a new tune by the Irish-American songwriter Dan Emmett called Dixieland. This was one of the early, if not the first, use of the word Dixie to represent states below the Mason-Dixon line. Older editions of the concise Oxford Dictionary seem to confirm the assertion, reporting that Dixie is a corruption of the surname of surveyor Jeremiah Dixon.
We're Mason and Dixon from old England to Grand. We came to America to survey disputed land. For 86 long years now, with violence and bloodshed, they fought o'er the question of just whose land this is. Is it the Calverts from Baltimore or the sons of William Penn? The king himself sent us here to put this thing to bed. Now we're here in America, our homeland far behind, facing Bear and the Iroquois, cliffs so hard to climb. In time will they tell the tale of how we chart the sky, and what it takes to pull those chains on the Mason-Dixon line. We sailed here from far away to an old Philadelphia dock, with the world's finest instruments packed in a wooden box. We cut our way through virgin land with 100 sturdy men. Sights we've seen along the way may never be seen again. We faced death and hardship and disease, but in the end, our team still pushed forward time and time again. We are here in America, our homeland far behind, facing Bear and the Iroquois, and cliffs so hard to climb. In time will they tell the tale of how we chart the sky, and what it takes to pull those chains on the Mason-Dixon line. When you see our marker planted there on the side of your road, read the map that tells the tale you shall surely know. We made our mark upon the earth, and somehow we survived. Now our names will live forever on the Mason-Dixon line. We're here in America, our homeland far behind, facing Bear and the Iroquois, and cliffs so hard to climb. In time will they tell the tale of how we chart the sky, and what it takes to pull those chains on the Mason-Dixon line. Just what it takes to pull those chains on the Mason-Dixon line. We sailed here from far away to an old Philadelphia dock, with the world's finest instruments packed in a wooden box.